So what I've got here is a prime winter bison hide. Now we're going to go through the entire brain tanning process from start to finish. We're going to start with the fleshing, and we're going to end up with a really nice, soft, supple, brain tanned buffalo robe. Now I got this hide from my friends over at the Wild Bison Ranch over in Montana, and once you get done watching this video, if you're not scared off by the amount of work that's going to go into this, if you want to try this yourself, I'll put their contact down there and you can get in touch with them and get your own just raw green skin to go through this process. So the first thing we're going to start with is fleshing this hide. Now all of this meat, all of this membrane and fat, all of that stuff has to come off, and with a hide this big, it's quite the job. With these knives, they have what's supposed to be a dull side and a sharp side. And so I'm just using the dull side or the less sharp side just to kind of push this flesh off instead of slicing it off. When you're fleshing these hides like this, it's important to make sure that there's no burrs or rolls or anything like that in the hide, because if you go up and you hit a burr, it's really easy to knock a hole in it with that fleshing knife. A few holes aren't the end of the world, because you can fix them later, you can sew them up, but it just adds more work. These things are already a ton of work, and so making additional work is counterproductive. What I like to do is just throw this thing up here with the middle of the hide kind of right at the end of the fleshing beam here. And I like to work from the middle out and just push all of this stuff to the edge of the hide. So I've got a tarp underneath me here because we're going to save all of these scraps and they'll all be used for dog food. That's all our dogs eat is trimmings and just scrap meat, you know, from leftover from processing wild game usually. Dogs aren't made to eat corn. Corn is like that's the base of most dog foods. So when you get down around these legs, there's going to be a lot of membrane that is going to cling very tightly to the legs. That stuff, you don't really have to get that off, because you're going to get that off once we get the hide on the frame. We're going to scrape it again with a different type of scraper, and we'll end up scraping all that stuff off. So in this process, just concentrate on getting all of the fat and all of the meat off. That little thin membrane that's left, you don't have to get that off at this stage. All right, so we've got our bison hide completely fleshed. There are a few holes in it. Some of them are from skinning the animal, and then there's a couple in here that I knocked in with the draw knife, so we'll have to sew those up later. But we are ready to move on to the next step of the process, which is an optional process or an optional step, and that's washing the hide. I'm going to wash it because this bison hide is pretty dusty. There's going to be a lot of dirt and stuff that is trapped inside the fur, and this is going to be the only opportunity that we're going to have to clean this hide. So I've put about 30 gallons of warm water in this bathtub, and then a big scoop of this Tide laundry detergent. And that Tide's gonna help do two things. It's gonna help wash the fur, get that dirt out of it, but it's also gonna help cut some of the fats that may still be on the hide. So we'll just go ahead and get started. We'll see how nasty it turns the water just in a few seconds. We'll send this thing through a couple of a couple of cycles. We'll wash it out, we'll bring it up with the tractor and let it drain out, because it is going to be very, very heavy when this is saturated with water. So we'll just use the tractor to pick it up so all the water can drain out of it, and then we'll douse it again and just kind of go through a couple of those cycles and get as much of the dirt out as we can. I may end up trimming these legs off a little bit just to kind of round it out a little bit, but we'll go around the edge with our knife and we'll punch a hole about a ½ inch in from the edge, about every 5 or 6 inches or so. That's going to give us holes to lace the hide onto our frame. These little extra little tags like this, I'll just cut that off. I'm going to go from the top down so I don't pull hair through. Just tie this one off and then start lacing this thing. So we're going to let the hide dry on the frame like this, and then we'll start into the scraping and thinning. If you're stretching especially a big hide like this, elk, bison, moose, something like that, you really need to make sure that you secure the corners of your frame so that it doesn't warp as it dries. So it's been a couple weeks and the hide is completely dry now. We can start the scraping process. Now I've already started scraping this hide. On this side, you can see the difference between this and this. This side has not been touched, and there's still a little bit of membrane that's attached to the hide. We're going to scrape all of that stuff off, and the most important part of this is actually thinning the hide, and we're going to get this thing paper thin. And when you're doing big heavy hides like this, bison, elk, anything that you want to be soft, you have got to get it thin. If we tried to brain tan this hide like this without thinning it, it would be impossible to get it soft, you know, that soft texture like you want on a buffalo robe. Now the scraper that I'm going to be using is a traditional style of scraper, and the blade here I just made with the end of a leaf spring. I ground it to shape, and then I heated it up till it was like cherry red and quenched it in oil, and then didn't do any heat treat to it after that at all. And the qualities of this steel are such that if you do it that way, it actually holds a pretty good edge. And that's one of the important things with these scrapers, is you have got to keep them razor sharp in order for it to take off the shavings on this hide like we need to. So our first pass, we're primarily going to be taking off the extra membrane that's just stuck on the hide that we didn't get during the fleshing process. But we'll go over this whole thing, take off that first pass, and then on our second pass, we're actually getting down into the core of the skin. And all of those scrapings, you can collect those, put them in a pot with some water and just kind of simmer them, and that's how you make hide glue. hide dries out completely like it needs to be to scrape it, it's already very thin, especially up around the shoulders and in the flanks and on the belly areas. And so it can become difficult to know how far to go. So one of the ways that I gauge how much to scrape and when to stop scraping is just by feeling the hide. And it's hard in the middle because it's stretched really tight. But if you go around the edges and kind of just feel the edges of the hide, anywhere you have a hole, you can just kind of feel in there and kind of pinch the hide and try to move it a little bit. And when it gets thin enough, you can start to flex it pretty good. The other way is inevitably when you get, unless you're very, very experienced scraping these hides, when you get really thin like that, you're gonna break through. And I've done that right here. So this is the hump area, up around the neck, and this is one of the thicker areas of the hide. So I was really kind of focusing on this area up here around the neck to try to thin that out. And you can see I've thinned it out so much that I've popped right through it. And I didn't cut through it. My scraper just kind of punched through the hide, but just because it was very thin. And you can see how thin it is here. It's as thin as a playing card. And so I think we're at the point now where we can stop scraping and go ahead and put some brain on this. So this is a female, it's a cow bison, and their hides are quite a bit thinner than a mature bull to start with. And so it's gonna be, if you can get your hands on a cow hide, it's gonna be a lot less work. Bull hides, especially up around the neck, are just very, very thick. I mean, like a raw skin right off of a bull bison, not thinned or anything. I mean, it's 3/8 up, even up into like maybe a ½ an inch on a mature bull. Just really thick hides. So if you have the opportunity to choose your own hide and to look through hides, one of the big things to look for is what's called scoring. So when whoever skins the animal, when they're skinning, if they cut into the skin but don't cut all the way through it, that's called a score. And that is, if you look at all of these little lines right here, that's what all of that is scoring. Now this isn't too bad, but if the cut is deep enough, when you go to soften this hide and you're pushing and stretching on it, that will turn into a hole, and that'll be something that you're gonna have to sew up later. So when you're scraping a hide with scoring like this, you need to make sure that you go in line with those scores rather than across them, because on these scores, there's going to be a high side and a low side, or a thicker side and a thinner side. And if you go across them, your scraper is just going to drop down in that little recess that the score creates, and you stand a much higher chance of popping through it and creating a hole right there. It is kind of wet weather right now, so I'm going to do most of this under the barn. We'll just lay this out flat, and then we're going to put a solution an emulsion of egg yolks, a little bit of neatsfoot oil, which is a natural oil derived from animal parts, animal hooves, primarily in hides, and some warm water. And we're going to spread that over this and just let this hide soak that emulsion up. We want this to penetrate fully, and so if we just leave it uncovered like this, the egg yolk is going to start to kind of dehydrate, and it's basically going to create a film on top of the hide. And so in order to help this hide soak up this emulsification fully, we're going to go ahead and just cover this with plastic sheeting. Now I'm using some garbage bags that I've cut up. I don't know how they would have done it historically. I would imagine they would have taken just another hide they were working on and just placed it flesh side down on top of this one. that would do the same thing. But basically we're just trying to keep it moist until this dry hide sucks up all of this, all these oils that are present in this emulsification. All right, so we're gonna just let this sit overnight. We'll come back to it tomorrow, and hopefully this hide has sucked up all of that moisture and we can start stretching it. Probably gonna put another application of that stuff on there and just keep working it until it's dry. So it's the next day. It looks like the hide is soaked up most of the egg solution that we put on there. And now I'm just gonna kind of push on the hide and try to open these fibers up, because we'll pour another round of that emulsion on there and just let it soak that stuff up. So all this stuff that didn't soak in, we'll just put it back in the blender and reconstitute it. Use it for the next round. So I've gone over the entire hide with the paddle to try to stretch the fibers as much as I can. And then after I did that, I just went back over the entire thing with the scraper, just scraping off the excess egg that didn't soak into the hide. We've got a pretty good bit here. We're just gonna go back and put a little bit of warm water with this, reconstitute it, and pour it back over this hide, and then just start working that stuff in there. We want this hide to be completely saturated. We want this egg or brain mixture, if you're using brains, to fully penetrate this hide. So I went ahead and put a second application of our egg yolk emulsion on here, and I'm just working this hide, stretching these fibers so that it soaks up this egg yolk as much as possible. So to make sewing these holes a little bit easier and make them a little bit more stretchy so they close up a little better, I'm going to take a hot, damp rag and just put on the holes, leave it there for a few minutes to just kind of soften the edges of those holes up a little bit. Now, the thread that I'm using is just wax nylon, artificial sinew, a lot of people call it. We'll sew it up with this, and then later on I may come back with some natural sinew and re-sew these holes. So we've got 3 applications of the egg yolk on this hide, which has soaked up quite a bit of it. We've got all of the holes sewed up, and now it's getting kind of late in the day, so we're gonna put it up for the night. I'm gonna go ahead and just cover this with hot, wet towels, just so this hide rehydrates overnight. Hopefully it'll be completely rehydrated in the morning, and we can start with the softening process. All right, so it's next morning after we let this just sit with those wet towels all night, and most of the hide is really well rehydrated. There's a few areas kind of back here around the haunches where the towel wasn't really touching the hide very well that are still a little dry. So I'll just go ahead and heat up some water, re-soak these towels, and just kind of put them back on these areas. All right, so our hide is rehydrated, and now we're going to let it sit like this and partially dry out. Now you might ask, well, why did we go through all of the trouble of rehydrating this thing if now we're just gonna let it dry out again? And the answer is dry raw hide is a little bit hydrophobic. And so by rehydrating the entire thickness of the hide and then allowing the hide to partially dry, it just kind of opens up those fibers and makes the hide much more absorbent. So we're gonna let it sit like this overnight. We're gonna let it partially dry, and then we're gonna come back with another round of that egg solution. We're gonna put that on there, and then we're gonna take our shoes off, get up on this thing and start walking on it, start pushing on every part of the hide, and just working those oils into the hide, and try to do that until it dries out. Okay, so we've got a little bit of sun, so I went ahead and dragged this thing out here tends to start the softening process. I've been walking on it for maybe half an hour or so, and there's starting to get some areas that are starting to dry out. And so I've go ahead and reconstituted my egg yolk mix, and I'm just going to start putting this on these drier areas and working these egg oils down into the hide.
Oh, the thin part. Nasty. You were helping. I am.
So the hide is slowly drying out. We're in the softening process of this, and once you start this, you want to just keep going until this hide is completely dry. So what's happening is, if you look closely at this hide, it's made up of a bunch of little crisscrossed fibers. It almost looks like fiberglass matting, and naturally in hides there is glue. It's a collagen. And if that glue is allowed to dry without moving and separating those fibers, they'll stick together and create rawhide. And so we need to keep all these fibers moving and sliding past each other as it dries, so that those hides or those fibers don't stick together. And so as this hide dries, you'll notice that the thinner areas around the flanks and up around the shoulders, they're going to dry quicker. And so just as they dry, as those areas are getting drier, just focus more on those. Really make sure that you take your tool and don't just rub on the surface, but you really need to push down in there and stretch those fibers out. But you need to work every square inch of this hide, stretching those fibers over and over and over again until they completely dry. So once you get to this stage, this is the most physically demanding, the most strenuous part of the whole thing, because you can't really take a break. Once you start it, you kind of need to keep going, because if you get halfway through and then you take a break and you allow those hide fibers to dry without moving, you're going to create stiff spots, and then you're going to have to come back and start over again. If you do create stiff spots like that, you can just take a little bit more of that egg solution and put on there and kind of work that in, and just do that spot or that area, so you don't have to do the whole thing. But you're going to have to keep working it until it's all dry. And you can tell when you put your hand on the hide, if it feels cold, it's still got moisture in it. It might seem like it's dry, but if it feels cold and clammy, it has still got moisture in it. You still need to keep working that area. One thing I want to note is that it is relatively cool out here. It's early spring. It's probably 50, 55 degrees, and that is why I'm in the sun. If it was July and it was 80, 85 degrees, I would not be in the sun doing this, because that would cause the hide to dry out too fast, and I just wouldn't be able to keep up with it. And so warm, dry weather, I would be doing this in the shade, but because it is relatively cool out here, it's okay to get this in the sun to help it along, help it dry a little bit faster. All right, so I've been walking on this thing and stretching it for, I don't know, about 4 hours or so. And it's pretty dry. I think there's still a little bit of moisture in it, but it's dry for the most part. And so I'm gonna go ahead and just cut this out just inside of my lacing holes. All that stuff around the edges are gonna be really stiff. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it out, and then I will finish this off by hand. It's turning out good. It's a little bit stiffer than I want it right now, but I think we can work that out just working it over a rope. I've got a cable here that's connected down here. It's probably a 3/8 cable or something. And we're just gonna work this hide, the stiffer areas anyway, on this cable, just back and forth, kind of rubbing it back and forth, and that's going to help break down some of those fibers and loosen this thing up, make it a little softer. if you're working in really thin areas, you need to be careful with this technique because you can rip a hole in it if you're working with a really delicate hide or a really thin part of the hide. So I'm just going to go ahead and work over this whole hide, and I'll bring y'all back when I'm done. It's going to take a little while. It's pretty doggone soft. There's areas like this right here that are just really soft and supple. I mean, just really nice. And then there's other areas that were probably a little bit thicker. I probably didn't scrape down quite as much. And they're not bad, but they're not as soft as the softest parts. And so you could take this hide to the next step, which is smoking it, but I think traditionally, and I could be wrong on this, but I think traditionally most of the robes were not smoked. The only real reason to smoke a hide is if there's a potential for it to get wet, because if it gets wet and then it's allowed to dry again without working it, it can get stiff again. And most of the robes, most of these buffalo hides you're gonna test or you're gonna tan like this, you're not gonna have them out in wet weather. Now, I am working on another buffalo hide right now that I'm planning on taking on some primitive camping / hunting adventures later this winter. And so I'm gonna do that one in a little bit more natural setting, and I am gonna smoke that one because it will be out in the elements. But I think we're gonna call this one good. This one's gonna live in the house, and it turned out really nice. Just a really nice winter hide. We'll put this on the couch and be a nice place to snuggle up in the winter. I like it. So when I get this next hide done, like I said, I'm gonna take it on some primitive camping / hunting adventures. So if you wanna see me ride out a blizzard in one of these things, you might go ahead and subscribe because it's probably gonna happen. So I hope y'all enjoyed that, and we'll see y'all on the next one.